Mass media monopolies control people by their control of information. On November 12, 2008, 1 week after Barack Obama's election to the presidency of the United States of America, a special edition of the New York Times hit the streets of New York City. 100,000 copies were distributed on street corners by volunteers during the morning rush hour. Smiles and shrieks of disbelief rose from the people as they scanned the headlines. The front page cover story read, "Iraq War Ends." The paper was dated July 4, 2009. This special edition of the New York Times was an elaborate instance of culture jamming cooked up by the Yes Men, an activist collective led by two regular Joes who, in their free time, play at revealing corporate bad guys and general injustice through humor and hoodwinks. So, what is culture jamming? Prominent author on the subject Naomi Klein defines culture jamming as the practice of parodying advertisements and hijacking billboards in order to drastically alter their messages. Mark Derry takes a broader look at the phenomenon, defining it as artistic terrorism directed against the information society in which we live. The term culture jamming was actually coined in 1984 by mashup musical group Negativland on their cassette-only release JamCon 84. The lyrics, resembling a kind of slam poetry, read, "As awareness of how the media environment we occupy affects and directs our inner life grows, some resist. The skillfully reworked billboard directs the public viewer to a consideration of the original corporate strategy. The studio for the cultural jammer is the world at large." In sum, culture jamming is the act of reworking mass media-produced texts and transforming their intended unidirectional messages into a public dialogue between image producers and image receivers. When Negativland coined the term, they were inspired by jamming and billboard banditry. Jamming was the then popular practice of trolling conversations over citizens-band radios and interrupting them with nonsense sounds or obscenities. Billboard banditry was the increasingly common practice of illegally altering billboards in order to make a political statement. Some billboard bandits include the San Francisco Liberation Front, who started altering ads and billboards in the 1980s, and the billboard-utilizing graffitists against unhealthy promotions, Bugga Up, who caused millions of dollars worth of damage in 1983 when they culture-jammed hundreds of tobacco ads in the Sydney region in Australia. A similar kind of image altering can be traced back further to the concept of détournement. Made popular by Guy Debord and the Situationists in the late 1950s in France, détournement consists of reappropriating texts from popular culture and flipping their intended meaning into something radical and often political. Beyond mere images, though, Naomi Klein says that the most sophisticated culture jams are not standalone ad parodies, but interceptions, counter messages that hack into a corporation's own method of communication to send a message starkly at odds with the one that was intended. And it is in this, the creme de la creme of culture jamming, that the Yes Men succeed with their special edition of the New York Times. The Yes Men say that their main practice is identity correction, which Andy Bickelbaum defines as exposing an entity's inner workings to public scrutiny. They have different reasons for using identity correction, but in the case of the New York Times special edition, it was used to correct public opinion and mobilize the everyday citizen. Newspapers kept writing about the goal of getting back to where society was before the crash, but the Yes Men couldn't swallow that ideal. If society went back to where it had been, wouldn't another crash be imminent? So in the wake of the great nationwide effort that elected Obama to the presidency, the Yes Men called for continued action from the people to make realities out of the dreams that got them to vote for Obama in the first place. One collaborator on the hoax, politically inclined artist Steve Lambert, described the mission of this culture jam as being to get people thinking about what's possible if we think big and act collectively. The utopian fake news disseminated by the Yes Men, from salary caps for big-time CEOs to free healthcare to a unanimous vote from the UN to dismantle all missiles and, most importantly, the end of the war in Iraq, was hardly different from the news most Americans wish they read about. The big difference was seeing it in print under the guise of legitimacy provided by the New York Times title, and believing, if only for a second, that it all really could become a reality. It would just take work, the active kind, instead of passive news reading. But does fake news really work in bringing about change? Well, that depends on what change you're hoping to see. Fake news does work in disrupting the dominant discourse by undermining the credibility of news-gathering networks. It also works to remind us to look beyond the headlines, since, more often than not, What is not reported speaks louder than what is. It gives professional journalists reasons to cover the topics fake news writers actually want to read about. It also uses the underestimated and undervalued power of humor to unite, embolden, and empower people in a greater cause. The New York Times special edition definitely offered a counter-message to that which was being put forth by the New York Times publication, and it did hack into the corporation's own method of communication. Yet, unlike culture jams that focus on criticizing the message producer, the Yes Men focused their criticism on American society at large. The jammers' message was clear. Sure, Obama got elected, but that doesn't mean it's time to regress into passive ignorance and whine about why presidents never keep their promises. Through a massive group effort that received major attention from both world media and individuals, the Yes Men proved that the average Joe doesn't simply influence, but is the backbone of all that goes on in society. Get enough Joes together and the sky's the limit. What can we say of the Yes Men's choice of culture jamming a newspaper? And not just any newspaper for that matter, but the world-famous New York Times. Culture jamming has grown exponentially in popularity since the advent of desktop publishing and the internet, but here the Yes Men stand out for reverting to a more old-school technology for their jam, printed paper. As Marshall McLuhan would say in this case, the medium is the message. Independent of content, the medium of a newspaper contains inherent messages. It is localized, it is researched and based on fact. It's legitimate and an authoritative voice. It connects events and the people they affect. It is no coincidence that the Yes Men reproduced real-seeming copies of the New York Times newspaper instead of publishing a blog or posting a billboard for their jam. They wanted people to feel like the fake headlines they were reading could be real and really affect them, and the inherent message in this famous newspaper's medium worked to strengthen this aim. On that note, there's a massive message inherent in the practice of culture jamming as well. A grassroots activity at its foundation, culture jamming recalls the power of the people, a democratic society, the taking back of public space, and the obligation of the audience to engage in our infoculture or fall victim to it. To use the words of Jello Biafra, the lead singer of the Dead Kennedys, what better way to survive our anthill society than by abusing the very mass media that sedates the public? A prank a day keeps the dog leash away.